Good morning, students. The next topic in your software engineering user requirement. We are collecting the user requirements. Reason that is your system has to accept all kind of peoples. Whenever you are developing a project or software, it has to accept all kind of peoples. Even though they are not knowledge about the system, they could be in a position to use the application. So what is user requirement here is user requirement describes what services the system is expected to provide and the constraint under which it must operate, and the requirement should describe your functional and non-functional requirements. So it has to accept all kind of people, all kind of users, and they should specify only a external behavior and avoid the system design characteristics. User requirements are defined using natural languages, tables, and diagrams. So mostly they will use the natural language to define your user requirements. There is some problem in using natural language. So lack of clarity, requirement confusion, requirement amalgamation. So what is lack of clarity is that whenever you are using the natural language to define the user requirement, there is a possibility of ambiguity in it. We need to avoid it. Next one is requirement confusion. We are collecting lot of requirements here, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, and we are defining the system goals, lot of things. So here we need to clearly distinguish all those things. We should not confuse with that. Next is requirement amalgamation. Several requirements are collectively given as a single requirement. We need to elaborately define it. That's all. So next is the requirements includes both conceptual information and detailed information, and here the user requirements should simply focus on the key facilities to be provided, and some guidelines we need to follow whenever you are defining the user requirements. So what are the guidelines here is use the standard format to define all the requirements, use language consistently, use text text highlighting like bold, italic, or color. Avoid technical terms. The next requirement here is system requirement. The system requirements describes the external behavior of a system and its operational constraints. This explains how the user requirement should be provided by the system. Here also your requirement should be complete and consistent. We are using the natural language to define the system requirements. Here also we are facing some drawbacks in the natural language uses. First drawback here is ambiguity in the language. So whenever you are defining the system requirements, there may be a possibility of ambiguity in it. Next is your language is over flexible. We need to modularize your language. So these are the drawbacks we are facing whenever you are using the natural language. So next is notation used for system requirement specification. So we are using some notation to define the system requirement. First one is structural natural language. Second one is design description language. Third one is graphical notation. Fourth one is mathematical specification. So we'll see it one by one. First one is structured natural language. We are using the natural language to define the system requirement. Here we are using some standard forms or templates to define the requirement. So next one is design description language. Here we are using the programming language to define your requirement. Here next one is graphical notation. We are using graphical notation to define the to define your system requirement. So here example, we are using the text annotation to define the functional requirement. Last one is your mathematical specification. Here we are having lot of mathematical notations to define the system requirements. So example, finite state machines or sets uses lot of mathematical specification. Here also there is some ambiguity here is in the last mathematical specification we are using lot of mathematical notations, mathematical functions to define your system requirement. And this will the mathematical notations are used for finite state machines or sets. This unambiguous specification reduce the arguments between customer and contractor about the system functionality. As I told you already, we are using the structured natural language for specification. Here we are using a format, standard format or template to write the system requirements. And whenever you are using this natural language, it maintains expressiveness and understandability of the language. And structural languages notation limit the terminology that can be used and use template to specify system requirements. Whenever you are using standard forms to specify the functional requirements, we need to follow some guidelines. So first one is description of the function or entity being specified. So we need to give a description about the function or entity whenever you are using it. Next one is description of its input and where they come from. So we need to give a description about input. Third one is description of its output. So we need to give the description about the output. The next one is indication of what other entities are used. So next is description of the action to be taken. So these are the guidelines we need to follow whenever you are specifying the functional requirements in a standard form. First, we are using some graphical model to describe your system requirements. So one of the model I have written here. So one of the diagram I have written here. This is a sequence diagram for your ATM withdrawal. Here one person is going to withdraw the amount from their account. Here the person is the actor and the ATM and database they are lifelines. So they are accessing their account. So they have drawn the sequence of actions performed to withdraw the amount from their account. So this is the diagram for it.